Welcome to day 2 of the 2023 South Summit. My name is Clint Bowie. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the artistic director of the New Orleans Film Society, which is the nonprofit presenting organization that produces this event. In addition to the South Summit, we also mount the annual New Orleans Film Festival, an Oscar qualifying event that's coming up in November, as well as a suite of filmmaker development initiatives designed to support and equip South-based artists with the resources, tools, and connections they need to bring important Southern stories to life. These include the Emerging Voices program, which supports filmmakers of color right here in Louisiana with small grants and year-round support, as well as the Southern Producers Lab, which also provides small grants and a lab-like environment for South-based producers working on a narrative or documentary project in the region. We just convened both of those cohorts at the Atlanta Film Festival, where they connected with the broader region of Southern filmmakers and industry leaders, and we're so grateful to the Atlanta Film Festival for helping to facilitate that. I also encourage everybody listening to stay tuned for more details on this year's South Pitch competition, which will be held in conjunction with the New Orleans Film Festival and allows pitching opportunities and a chance to receive a $10,000 grant for a narrative project and one for a documentary project. So be on the lookout for more details and the application for that coming soon. I am currently zooming in from downtown New Orleans, a few blocks away from the Mississippi River. And it's important for us to acknowledge that the land we're on today has been an important meeting ground for thousands of years prior to our being here now. This place we call New Orleans was long known as Bulbancha by indigenous people, a site of exchange, a meeting ground where communities connected and traded. And the name Bulbancha translates to the place of many tongues in the native Choctaw language. At this time, I welcome you to use the chat function, if you haven't already, to acknowledge the ancestral keepers of the land wherever you're joining us from today. This is our 5th South Summit, and as in past years, we will follow the conference with a formal report that will be shared on our website. You can access reports from previous summits from 2018, 19, 21, and 22 on our website, neworleansfilmsociety.org. You can also access on our Medium page, neworleansfilm.medium.com, the 4 essays and provocations that were commissioned specifically for this year's summit, as well as those that were commissioned for previous summits. And in case you missed the 2021 or 2022 South Summit, you can check out recordings of all the sessions from those summits on our YouTube page. Yesterday was a really powerful day, full of some important conversations that felt honest and vulnerable. And I have to say, I started my work day by driving to the office with news on the radio that the Louisiana House had passed and advanced their own version of a "Don't Say Gay" law that filled me with the kind of pain and malaise that often comes with living in a red state in the South, where your values don't necessarily line up with the politics of your state. But I ended my day through South Summit with such encouragement and such hope through hearing people like Hannah Miller talk about what it's been like for her to find and to build queer sanctuaries for herself in Mississippi and Louisiana. And hearing from a group of queer Southerners talk about what it's been like for them to find support for their own stories and their own creative processes here in the South. It was an incredible experience for me, and just a reminder that powerful work is being done to support a path forward for us all to be seen and heard and supported despite whatever the laws and whatever politicians are trying to do to prevent that. This year's South Summit received generous support from Just Films, part of the Ford Foundation's Creativity and Free Expression Program, and the National Endowment for the Arts. We also received some critical support from ITVS, and we're so thankful to all of those institutions for their support. I also want to give thanks today to a few individuals who really helped make this event happen. including Lynn Sylvan, who is running tech behind the scenes and is doing her best to block any Zoom trolls who might be lurking out there today. As many of you might know from yesterday's South Summit, we had an instance where some Zoom bombers attacked our opening keynote, a beautiful keynote from Elaine McMillian Sheldon, and said some inappropriate things and forced us to end that session. We're extremely sorry that that happened and are doing everything we can to prevent it from happening today. But if we encounter something like that that might necessitate the abrupt closure of our Zoom, we'll do our best to restart as soon as possible with a new link that'll be emailed to everybody. So be on the lookout for that if that happens. We don't anticipate it because we've put in some further restrictions to block that, but just in case, wanted to mention it. We're also planning to re-record Elaine's keynote, and we'll be making that available on our YouTube page in the coming weeks. So stick around for that if you didn't get a chance to see it, or if you did see the truncated version yesterday. I also want to thank Marin Scott, who is managing the chat function today. Please feel free to ask questions, share comments, make connections through the chat. That's what it's there for. Thank you to Marin for facilitating and managing that. And thanks to Bo McGuire for curating this year's musical selections. I am loving these music breaks, and thank you to Bo for making all that happen. Bo's also a member of our programming team and actually delivered the keynote address at the South Summit in 2021, which is also available on our YouTube page. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. And I have to send some love and thanks to Fallon Young, our former colleague, who really helped vision and shape the very first South Summit in 2018, wrote some of the early grants that provided support for that and put all this into motion. We certainly wouldn't be here without that early visioning. So thank you to Fallon for that. And without further ado, I'd like to bring up my incredible colleague, Zuri Obi, who has been the chief architect and programmer of this year's South Summit and did such a stellar job yesterday with moderating so many Q&As and sessions. And I'm so looking forward to all that this second and final day of the South Summit has to offer. So Zuri, take it away.
Thank you for that welcome, Clint. And thank you to everyone for tuning into the closing day of the 2023 virtual convening of South Summit. We made it. I'm Zuri Obi. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm the Film and Conference Programmer here at New Orleans Film Society. You know, South Summit is an annual convening of local, regional, and national media makers, art administrators intended to seed conversation and action around resourcing and amplifying storytelling through film and media here in the American South. Our theme for the 5th annual convening is South is Sanctuary, and I, as a South-bred and South-based artist myself, I wanted to extend space to my fellow filmmakers and artists and art administrators to deeply reflect on what it means to call the American South home. So to kick us off, on our closing day, I've invited Angela Tucker, a friend and a award-winning filmmaker who originated from New York, but now calls the South home and at times calls it a complicated sanctuary. But before we get into our essay reading, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Angela and her work. Angela is an Emmy and Webby award-winning filmmaker working in scripted and unscripted film and television, highlighting underrepresented communities in unconventional ways. Recent works includes Belly of the Beast, directed by Erika Cohn, a New York Times Critics Pick, The Trees Remember, a series for REI, and a New Orleans NOEL, a Lifetime film starring Patti LaBelle. Films and productions are The Inquisitor, about political icon Barbara Jordan, and Steam, about a global alternative health treatment. She is a recipient of the 2023 Chicken and Egg Award and a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science. Thank you, Angela, for joining us. I would like to mention that throughout the session, you are welcome to drop any Q&A questions. At the end, we will have an audience Q&A. So as your questions come up, you can drop them in the chat box. But without further ado, I'm going to pass the spotlight over to my colleague and friend, Angela Tucker.
Hi, thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, New Orleans Film Society. You know, before I read this essay, I just have to say that having the community that I have in New Orleans, and specifically with the Film Society, has just been so invaluable for my work. And I just couldn't imagine a better community to just be a part of. So I will read my essay. It's called Treading New Ground. Spanish moss choking live oak trees is one of the most recognizable images of Louisiana's landscape. A plant that lives in a tree without any contact with the ground, Spanish moss is an epiphyte and causes no harm to the tree itself. It was given its name by French explorers. Native Americans, of course, called it something else. When I was 15, I participated in an outdoor education program for kids called Outward Bound. I was on a solo expedition on a small island in Maine. It was a time when, for better or for worse, kids were allowed to be left alone. They gave me a bag of gorp, good old raisins and peanuts, water, and a block of cheese, and left me completely alone in the forest for 3 days. When I got there, I could hear the kids in the distance. Some were banging on their trees with their canoe paddles just to end the silence. I just wrote in my journal and stared at the sky. It's still one of my most peaceful memories. My mother grew up in a small town deep in the Laurel Mountains of Pennsylvania. Most years we would drive 8 hours to spend Christmas there. The last hour was the toughest, straight up a steep mountain in a car with old tires. One Christmas, we couldn't make it all the way up and had to spend Christmas Eve in a sheriff's station at the mountain's base, eating cookies with salt. I'll never forget that Christmas. It was a reminder that nature can always intervene. My parents knew that growing up on the Lower East Side of New York City might limit my connection with nature. And so, at a young age, my dad took me fishing with our family in Kentucky, and my mom taught me to swim, survival skills that I barely use today. They died before I was 30. Their loss provided a real understanding of the impermanence of life. There are many pragmatic reasons why I moved to New Orleans after a lifetime in New York City, but honestly, this one pushed me over the edge. At the time, I was emotionally all over the place. I was 37, and I looked ahead to my 40th year. I couldn't help but notice that it was looking a lot like my 30th year. I was stuck. One night, I went to a party in Brooklyn, and there was a fortune teller who offered to read my palm. Upon examining my hand, she had one clear vision. She knew I was thinking about a place I wanted to move to, but was unsure if I should go. For a while, a friend had been working on me to move to New Orleans. She informed me that I had traveled there 6 times in the last 2 years. I didn't have a job or even a place to live there, but I had a hunch, a feeling that this place might give me something I was missing. The fortune teller didn't know the name of the place, but she said I should absolutely go. It would change my life. Every time I direct a project set in Louisiana, I always come upon the challenge of finding visual imagery of the landscape that doesn't feel overused. It is stressful. Sofia Coppola's film, The Beguiled, for example, takes place right after the Civil War. It is set in Virginia, but filmed in Louisiana. The film has at least 25 shots of Spanish moss. It is a movie featuring Nicole Kidman and Colin Farrell as Southerners. In terms of authenticity, it skimmed the surface. Live oak trees, Spanish moss's landlord, feel too obvious, and yet they are gorgeous. As complex as the South itself, they are indescribably beautiful and were used to cause indescribable pain. This contradiction lingers in the air. Bringing it up is a buzzkill, but the American landscape is as stunning as it is complicated. Running away and toward it is what you do. Nature was a tool used during slavery. It acted as an accomplice who could not be hidden. The vestiges of slavery are implanted in the soil, move through the Mississippi River, and hang from the branches of the trees. The vestiges of lynching are everywhere as well, but that's all over the country, not just in the South. Lynching is a form of social control that doesn't just happen from trees. I was drawn to spend that solo summer in the woods all those years ago because I never felt totally safe outdoors. I was 14 when the Central Park jogger case happened, a criminal case concerning the assault and rape of Trisha Miley, a white woman in Central Park, Manhattan. My mom told me not to go to the park at night. I knew those boys didn't rape the white jogger lady. I knew this because they were arresting many of my Black friends, grasping at straws to find any Black kid who might fit the bill, a true skimming the surface. At the time, I thought my mom was afraid that I would be raped. I now know she was afraid of something else. Upon rewatching The Beguiled, I discovered that Spanish moss only appears in the film 3 times. Also, Colin Farrell is supposed to be an Irishman who emigrated to the South before the Civil War, a historically accurate representation. That movie is still trash, but maybe it is more complicated than I allowed it to be. We have an oak tree in my backyard and its branches are descending. Trees have to be maintained, and my husband and I have to do it as we own the land. I never imagined I'd own land, and I honestly wonder if anyone actually does, but the importance of me as a Black woman playing this role is not lost on me. As I complete my first decade here, I continue to be struck by this place. Here there is this ability to see the best and the worst of things at the same time. You cannot delude yourself. Life is not fair. It is the most intense combination of feelings, dark and light, feelings that force me to dig deeper and deeper into myself and into the stories I tell. The pandemic strengthened my connection with the outdoors. Like everyone, I would put on a mask and roam around the park, City Park in New Orleans to be exact. My preferred nature activity is hiking. I really just like to walk, but when walking happens outside, it somehow becomes hiking. Due to my fear of heights, I like to hike on flat ground, so the flat landscape of New Orleans suits me. The beauty of the earth remains, no matter how bad things get. Thank you. And so now I think we're going to show a clip from a series that I made called The Trees Remember. It is from a short called Migration, which is about an older woman who was left by herself during the pandemic. And this is kind of like the moment where she embraces the beauty of the outdoors.
Oh, there he is. Oh.
That's the magic. They come and they go. We miss you out here.
Your essay kind of reads like an anthological film that kind of revisits moments with increasing clarity. So I really like how we move from Spanish Moss to Maine and the different spaces. It feels like, you know, like a film. So I really appreciate your filmmaker sensibility and your essay structure. Yeah, and I feel like your film, even with this scene, it explores a lot. But I think what it boils down to, what it feels like it boils down to, is the idea that maybe your sanctuary is bigger than you think, right? This idea that, yeah, your home may be a sanctuary, but home extends to natural sanctuaries as well. So I feel like that's kind of like the running theme, even with her longing and her searching, being safe at home. She found this kind of like delight, this kind of serendipity in nature that she was missing. And I feel like that really kind of mirrors your essay and what you're saying about how, you know, the park, I know this was shot at City Park, who cannot notice?
City Park.
Yeah, you know, I'm just like, I'm wondering how much of your experience in the pandemic and like your time that you had to explore City Park, which I feel like it's a tree museum, right? It has some of the oldest trees, beautiful trees in the South, if not in North America, but it's just a real privilege for us New Orleanians to have City Park. And a lot of us got a chance to, you know, explore it and get lost and to find out the different spaces that the park offers during the pandemic. So I'm wondering how much of that experience made it into the main character and how much of that experience inspired your script.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so I'll do one little step back to talk about how the project happened, which was REI was kind of looking for a filmmaker to make a series of films, and you know, all they really knew was they wanted to attract a more diverse audience to their website. That was pretty much the mandate, right? And so I was like, well, this idea that a lot of people have that like Black people aren't outdoors is pretty crazy, because like we are, and how did we get here? Slavery. We were really outdoors. So it's a ridiculous concept, right? So you kind of have to, so for me, I just thought, okay, I want to make a series of pieces that take place in 3 different time periods, that kind of, by the virtue of it taking place in 3 different time periods, it shows people that, like we've been outdoors in all of these different contexts, right? But also having characters in the film have a relationship with the outdoors that isn't like, I'm learning how to do this, or I'm learning how to do that, but a deeper connection to it. So in Migration, and the one you saw a clip from, that was the one that was really kind of touched upon a lot of different discussions that I had with people and moments that I had, right? Like it takes place in that time in 2020 where none of us really knew what was going on. Like the pandemic was happening. We had to stay inside. We didn't know how long we had to stay inside, but we were supposed to go outside for our, like our emotional health, but we were afraid to go outside. And so, I think we all tackled loneliness in a real way there. Like some people loved being inside all the time, and it was like all they ever wanted, and some people did not, and I think you really kind of figured out where you were in that at that time. So I really developed this. I lived really close to Central Park, City Park.
Better than Central Park.
No, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
digging at New York.
Yeah. And so I would go every day, and I would take walks, and I would it would just help me clear my mind. And I really kind of related to the main character. And also in the piece, she develops this relationship with a bird that she thinks is the spirit of her dead husband. And a lot of that came from like having conversations with friends and talking about, especially my friends who were living alone, because at the time I was living alone during that, right? And how you just started to have these moments where, you would see, and my friend literally said, I saw a bird and I was like convinced that was the spirit of my dead mother. And I was like, and it didn't sound crazy at the time. It was like, yeah, I get it.
You're like, that's what's up. That's what's up.
Sure, I get it. So yeah, I mean, that piece just speaks to a lot of different things that were going on at that time.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like I fell in the latter of like, I'm not going outside. Like with the pandemic, I was like, I have everything I need inside. I have my TV, I have my plants, my little park and my porch. But there were some times where I felt like, even before the pandemic, after the pandemic, there's always this thing where, let's meet at the wind chime tree. For those that don't know, City Park, it has this ancient tree, an oak tree with thick branches. And I guess a musician a while ago hung the wind chimes from specific branches so they make a note when the wind blows. So being under there, it's always been like peaceful, but it's complicated, right? It's just, it feels complicated because like I'll be laying under the tree and just, enjoying the tree and thinking about how thick the branches are and just how old the tree is. And then I run into the thought about the weight that these branches have held, right? And then I start like drifting and I'm like, okay, I need to stop thinking, because we know where for us, at least for me, where these thoughts are going. It starts off peaceful, but it always meanders into this like schism of like a flash or a memory of like, a wind chime, but also this tree probably held a person, right? And so, it's weird, our reactions to nature, a lot of folks, and how our access to nature is kind of racialized, right? In a way. Access to sanctuary, especially natural sanctuaries, is not something we all have equal access to. And even when we do access it, we don't experience it equally, right? And in your essay, you kind of, 2 quotes that hit me was just like, nature was used as a tool by slavery, right? Like this like complete implication of like this horrific act, right? And this other quote, lynching is a form of social control that doesn't just happen from trees, right? That was just like, oh my God, like it just really got this feeling, right, that I was experiencing, especially someone that loves nature, that loves trees, that loves climbing trees and plants. But I kind of want to know, like, I know how that quote hit me. But to start off this kind of like part of the Q&A, because it can get really heavy.
Yeah.
But like, tell us more about what that quote meant for you, right? And how, what does that mean? What does that mean for you as far as a person, a Black-bodied person experiencing nature? If you can give us a little more context or thought behind, those words.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, Zuri, I got to give you a shout out because I did a first draft of it, and I didn't really go there. I was like dipping my toe into the slavery space. And then we had kind of a deep conversation and I had to ask myself, why was I dipping my toe into the slavery space when obviously slavery is everywhere here? And when I'm lying underneath an oak tree, I have the same experience, right? Like I had this sort of fantasy of getting married underneath that oak tree. And I just was like, I can't get married.
Right? It's like slavery ruined trees for us.
It ruined it. I just was like, I'm not getting married underneath that tree. Like, it's just too many things are happening at once there. And I can't, so I mean, I did a lot of deep thinking about it and asked myself why I was like afraid of going there. And part of it is, I think, in a day-to-day, I don't want to go there in my mind, right? Like even when you were talking about it, it's like, I don't want to immediately go to where your brain has to go. But I felt like for this essay, it was important to talk about that, right? And to talk about this complicated relationship that you have with nature. And that's how I could link it to the Central Park case, because, I remember as a teenager, it was this like Central Park was my sanctuary in New York City. My high school wasn't far from there and we would go there all the time. And then that happened and it just became an entirely different place for me, And I think I also kind of in the piece wanted to reference that because, as someone who comes from, the Northeast, there are people in my life who equate certain terrible things to just happening in the South. And we all know that, like, racism, white supremacy, it's everywhere, so
yeah, I think I was telling you, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just was like, okay, like I need to kind of connect the dots for people, because it's not just like, okay, I see oak trees and I think literally, but we see forms of lynching, sadly, in this country in different ways. And so I just kind of wanted to draw, to be kind of explicit about that in the piece.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, and like what I was kind of like jumping to say, I know we had like a little chuckle about a meme that I came across that says like, folks up north always want to talk about like how racist the South is, but then want to move upstate New York, right? Right.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And you're like,
exactly. And I've experienced upstate New York. It's not that different. It really isn't. It's just cold. It's really cold. But yeah, so going back to the comment that REI wanted like a more diverse group. So they're obviously knowing, and it's not a secret that, not very many folks outside of white folks, right, are advertised to be in the outdoor space, right? When you look at these hiking ads and people smiling with their Patagonia, I don't see no sisters. I don't see no sisters in Patagonia, right? So obviously
it's expensive. So there's that.
It is expensive. I mean, so is like, I don't know, Chanel, but
that's true.
Trafalgar, right? But we're not rocking Patagonia. We're not rocking Brooks, right? So they know there's an issue with like, just like race and wanting to get more folks outdoors, and of course to give them money, but to kind of expand this conversation, right? So I'm wondering, because like, how do you feel race and place complicates experiences of nature? Like, let's get deeper than that. Let's get into that.
I mean, well, race I was going to say in the US, I don't know everywhere. I can only speak as an American, right? I can only speak of someone who has grown up here and lived here. Race complicates everything because you can't forget, as a Black person, how you got here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so you remember how you got here, and then you remember kind of the legacy and this whole fight of, I don't want people not wanting to talk about slavery, but we all know that that's how we got here. Everyone acting like, well, things are so great now, and we all know that they're not, you know. It's just like race complicates place in a real, in all kinds of ways. And it just, you know, with nature, I think you can't, especially with the South, because you have, you said a funny thing there where you were talking about like set deck for Louisiana. And it's so true. It's like so many of that's why I kind of reference like Spanish moss and live oak. And these are all images that people sort of tie to a specific, you know, to slavery. And so, you know, you can't really forget it, but you also, but it's also very beautiful, right? I mean, you know, the bayou, like all of these things are just so beautiful. And nature, I mean, all of nature is just so beautiful. And I think it's really important for Black people to take it back, you know, to take nature back, because this is our, like, this is our land too. And, you know, I think about like hiking and I, you know, I've gone hiking a lot. And I remember during the pandemic, I went to Utah because I'm crazy. And it was a deep pandemic. And I was like, I can't take it anymore. Going to Utah. Because I have a good friend who lives there and I could be outside, right? Like a lot of the time there. But it was interesting because it was like, oh, right. But then there's not a lot of Black people in Utah. So I would be going hiking and, you know, people would kind of look at you weird. And so then you feel this, you're in the outdoors and people are kind of looking at you like, well, what are you doing here? You know?
What you doing outside?
Like, what am
How'd you make it out here?
Yeah, what are you doing here? You know? So yeah, it's complicated, you know, it's real complicated. But I that's why it's really important for me. And I think this comes from my parents of just having this legacy of like, this is our land too. And just because we're not buying like expensive jackets doesn't mean that it's not our land, you know? And I think, you know, like, and that was my point to them. I mean, they were great to work with in that I could just be this kind of transparent with them. Like, just because a lot of people aren't buying like $200 fleeces doesn't mean that we're not outdoors, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, it's complicated, you know, but I mean, I love the outdoors. And, you know, I'm trying to make a little trip for myself actually very soon, because I'm having that feeling like creatively, I sort of need a certain amount of time, just like in the woods, just reading and just like not having all of the distractions that you have, and just, you know, and I don't know what it is that nature gives you, but it gives you a lot.
Yeah, we're going to get into that, your creative process, because I think folks would be interested to hear that. But yeah, just going back to this idea of like nature and outside being complicated, like me, the same thing. Like I'm Haitian, and my mom like literally brought all of Haiti's plants to Miami, right? Because she didn't want to go grocery shopping. You know, she wanted her beans, she wanted her cane, so cassava and everything that she needed. But like with friends, like, I'm like, you know, let's go camping, or like, let's work in this garden or outdoors. They'd be like, girl, Martin Luther King fought for us not to do this. Like, we don't have to be tilling the soil no more, right? But it's just like, it is a different connection. It is a different feeling that I feel like is complicated. So yeah, thank you so much for kind of like, you know, going there with me. But yeah, so, you know, I guess I wanted to ask another question on that vein too. It's just your experiences, because like you talked about Utah and like folks looking at you like, you know, what are you doing here? How did you make it out the door? Like, didn't we put you somewhere? At growing up though, you said that in Maine, that was like one of your first experiences being outdoors. And I've come to know, you know, some of the involvements that you have with like, you know, outdoorsy groups that you've come to find sanctuary in. But before then, I'm wondering what pushed you to find that sanctuary. Like, where was it, like any kind of negative, not negative, but just experiences that were intense enough for you to push you towards in not only insisting on nature being part of your sanctuary, but finding other folks that are like you. You know, do you feel like you've had pushback or any kind of like, the same thing my friends tell me, like, why are we going camping? Like, you know, there's houses, right? Like, you know, there's roofs, right? There's electricity.
Yeah.
You know, I'm wondering if that resonates with you, if you had experiences like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my best friend is not a camper, and it'd always just be like, but there's electricity. I don't understand why. I think part of it is like my upbringing. Like I think, my mom growing up in a fairly rural place and going there, spending summers there, I just had a different experience of like, I could see like, this is what New York City is, and this is what like Johnstown, Pennsylvania is. And, and so, there was nature kind of all over there. I think it demystified, I mean, sometimes, especially if you grow up in like a big city, nature becomes this thing that almost has to be demystified because people act like being out in the nature has to be a whole thing. You gotta like, make a tent, and you gotta like,
build a fire from scratch. Like you gotta use sticks.
Like,
and it's like, no, there's lighters.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, it's like a whole thing, right? And then, but really that summer that I did Outward Bound, I mean, I think a friend had said, oh, you can't do something like that because like, what are you gonna do? You don't know how to, it was a whole thing where you canoed and you hiked and you did like this like little mini kids triathlon thing. And and everybody was like, you can't do that. And so if you tell me I can't do something, then I want to do it. So that's how it started. I was like, ooh, I'm gonna do it. And then I just got so much from the independence that you feel when you're kind of in nature on your own. You're not like focused on anything. You're just kind of able to kind of be off on your own. And I think I was at an age where I just really kind of wanted to be off on my own and wanted, because it's that age where you're a young teenager and people are still treating you like a kid, but you kind of want to just do your own thing. And even though upon reflection, it's kind of crazy that they really just let us go off wherever in the mountains of Maine. It was a great experience. So I think that was kind of my intro to it. And then, just I've had a lot of different experiences that sort of keep some kind of connection with nature. I mean, I'm part of this group Girls Trek. I haven't trekked with them in a while, but it's this a Black women walking organization, but you can do like hiking, walking. And so when I first moved here, I went with them to Selma for, the anniversary of like, Selma, the anniversary, we walked across the bridge.
Washington,
Thank you.
yeah, the march.
Exactly. Like we walked across the bridge. You know what I'm talking about? So and that was like an incredible experience because it was all Black women walking together. And that was a really like profound thing. It kind of reminded me of why I had moved to this part of, of the country. So yeah, I mean, I love it. I love, I didn't really necessarily know I had all of these connections to nature really until you guys like pointed it out to me. I was like,
you're a nature kid. You're a nature.
Yeah, I'm like, oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's funny how it's just like, it just sneaks up. It's like part of who you are. It's not even like, something that you consider. It's just, part of, how you show up.
Yeah.
And just this image, like when you're like Black women walking together, like a group of Black women, I was just like, whoa, that would like be mind blowing, right? And just kind of talking about sanctuary and safe space. I've come into a community called Ladywoods that's in upstate New York, and it's basically Black women filmmakers that come together, and it's glamping. It's not camping. It's cute, but it's in the middle of nowhere. And I remember first, this idea of like nature as horror was always in my mind, like, oh my God, it's dark outside, these like weird sounds. But it got to a point where it was like the most comforting, right? I looked forward to those moments of just like no silence, no internet, no nothing, but just trees and crickets and just things that to discover, right? Like all day without having to engage, you think about, you're like, oh, I'm not, I don't know. It's just like, there's so much to do when you don't in real life. Right. And I'm realizing that when you like shut off, it's like, wow, it's like more expansive than actually online. I don't know. So I just wanted to like kind of like say that resonated with me deeply.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess, pivoting a little bit, talking about, your former state of New York and, here in the South, a lot of major film hubs like New York, where you're from, you know, that's where you go to make it, right? Like you go to New
Yeah.
York to make it. But a lot of folks' experiences of the South, at least my experiences, is the South is where you go to make yourself, right? I feel like there's more space to kind of build your own foundation, move at your own pace, and not necessarily be in like the ricochet movement of major film hubs. And again, if this is not like a blanket experience, and you were making films well before you moved to New Orleans. So, and thank you to the fortune teller. I feel like you were so New Orleans before you even got here. Like that's fortune teller, like you were already here. You were just feeling it. But like just really thinking deeply about your film community in New York, right? And then the film community here. In the past 10 years, first, how has your approach to your work shifted, if at all? As opposed to like, how your creative process in New York and your creative process here. And, let's start off with that. How has it changed? What are the differences that you felt that have kind of helped you just have a firmer framework on the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think I would say that I got a lot more confidence when I moved here in my work, and I'm not sure what that is, but I definitely think that the connection of place, like the having to reconcile one, living in New Orleans, not being from here, asking myself deep questions about whether I can tell stories about New Orleans, what kinds of stories I can tell. And you're very aware of that as like being someone who is not New Orleanian, telling stories. And there's a lot of people who do that. So it does, first of all, you have to do a lot of deep thinking. There's no like, I'm just going to go off and make a thing about New Orleans. Like it took me years to really make a thing that was about New Orleans, because I was like petrified of it for a very long time. I mean, when I was in New York, I feel like that part of my career was really getting a deeper understanding of how to make films, of like, there was a lot of like going to school and producing. And, I worked at this production company called Big Mouth Productions for like 8 years, and mainly produced and then eventually made like one feature doc, Asexual. But like all of those years, I was just really understanding how to make films and how to tell stories and gaining my confidence. And so by the time I got to New Orleans, I did have a strong foundation in terms of feeling more confidence around being at the helm of something and making something, and my ability to take an idea from an idea and make it to a thing, and being comfortable with kind of the nebulousness, especially of like documentary, where you like have an idea and then it's just like, for a while, I was like, I'm just gonna follow this thing. I don't know, and I'm gonna write grants. Like I know what this thing is, but I don't really know what this thing is, And so I think, and that also came from producing in New York, of like, having to be on another side, not having it be entirely my creative vision. So being able to have to just think, okay, pragmatically, how are we going to make this film? When none of us really know what it is, right? So by the time I got here, I think I also knew that I wanted to do more fiction work. I wanted to work in fiction and in documentary. And I just didn't feel like I could easily do that in New York. And part of that is just tied to, there's just a financial reality of living in a really expensive place. I mean, and even though New Orleans has gotten more expensive since I've lived here, it's still, like, it's just, I really just hit a point where in order to make work, I was going to have to take a lot of other jobs, and then I was going to have to make a lot less work. And then I just felt like, I was really aware of what the day-to-day of I am really aware of like, what am I doing day-to-day in my life, right? Like a lot of people get very, art, film is this and art is that, and it's all very like, woo, 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 right? But art is waking up in the morning and sending an email sometimes to get to the person who you need to film, and so much more of it is sending emails than people really talk about, right? So when I really was thinking about practically like what is my day-to-day going to be like in New York, it was going to have to be like working on a lot of other people's projects to be able to afford the kind of life that I wanted. And so I said, what if I just didn't do that? You know, what would it be like if I just didn't do that? And I think it was like, you know, a great decision in that I felt a lot more confidence to just try things here. And and I also do want to say that it was from working all of those years in New York. I did have a lot of contacts in New York. So you know, like I knew from working at this production company, I knew a lot of people who, if they needed stuff done remotely or something, this was before remote. When I first moved here, this was like before everybody was on Zoom. It was a little bit like, you're gonna move to New Orleans, like, what are you gonna do? You know,
it was Skype then.
Yeah, you know, with Skype then, but you know, and so I think that having the relationships that I had in New York, to your point that you began with around like New York is where you go to make it. I knew enough people who were like semi-powerful that I could be like, okay, I'm just gonna let them know I'm here, and was pulling work from New York. And then eventually I was able to kind of like create more and more of my own work and my own sort of like systems of, okay, I can get money from like an REI and I can make a thing that's here and everything's here. And I don't need, you know, like somebody else to hire me to do something.
And yeah, we're so grateful that you made that decision, you know, just like a amazing part of the, you know, New Orleans filmmaking community, always seeing you around just in life, but, you know, during the festival and other programs, like, you know, I don't know, just like that decision does set off a lot, right? And not only for you, but also valuable to the communities that you enter, right? Folks that are leaving other hubs to come to the South, they're entering a community and showing up fully as part of the community, not extractive, right? That's just a beautiful addition to any community. That's
oh
really
yeah,
great.
no, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you say that, because I think it's really important to, I didn't just want to just move here and, you know, be hiring everybody else in New York and LA anyway.
Exactly.
Or, you know, I really, you know, it's important for me to hire locally, like, you know, to have as many people on my team as possible be based here, so that more and more, because we need more and more people that are based here to have kind of the skill sets of how to produce, of how to direct, how to do all of these different roles. And so I take it upon myself to do that, because I really want to like build that out and let more people know that there's more opportunities in the film industry than they think there are. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation and these words. I feel like we're always hitting like, you know, this really great stride in the conversation. But I'm going to take this time to slow myself down and shut up and give folks in the chat that have so many questions for you. So I'm going to pivot to that. All right. So we have one question from Jasmine, currently in that position of being a producer and just learning everything. So Jasmine is currently in that position. What was the moment you knew you were ready to take the next step in your career?
Oh, I mean, I don't think you think about it as like a next step. I don't think about it as like the next step. I think when I went to film school, and one thing that somebody told me there was they were really like, and this is like, I had like a professor who makes a lot of films and is very fancy, and he was pretty much like, it's just one project at a time, you know, that's really all it is. And so I think the next step is, okay, I want to, as a producer, you know, it's like, I want to make the project, or I want to come on to this project, and or I want to, you know, learn, you know, how to be a producer, and maybe I, you know, I'm intern, or I'm an associate producer, or I do something like that. I think you just have to think about what is the appropriate next step for yourself, and then set yourself up to make that appropriate next step. And then you kind of make the next step, and then the next step. Like, so for me, I'm always kind of thinking about what is the next thing that I'd like to do, even if it doesn't really make any sense to anybody else, you know, like, I think me making documentaries and me like making a Christmas movie, people were like, what's going on, you know? But for me, I know I'm interested in all of these different things. And as much as I can get people to let me to do it, I'm just gonna like move in the directions that kind of call me and make the most sense to me. So it's thinking about what your appropriate next step is and moving in that direction versus thinking like, sometimes I think people think too big and they're like, oh, well, you know, I want to get to this place. And it's like, no, what's the appropriate next step for you?
Yeah.
And then you get there and then because I mean, you know, I worked at a production company for 8 years and I started out as an intern and I was an intern, I was an associate producer. I really like spent a lot of time like moving up. And I worked with and I have no regrets about doing that because I worked with amazing people, you know, who were incredible filmmakers. And I really learned how to make movies there, even more so than film school. So yeah, I think it's just kind of thinking about that. What is the most appropriate next step?
Yeah, I'm just so embarrassed that I always I live my life in memes, but I'm thinking of a meme of a guy that's he's doing a split across stairs, like where you are to where skipping all these steps.
Yeah.
Right. Like you got to build that brick, you know, to get to the other side. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see if we have any more questions. I think we have one from Summer Garcia. One of my sanctuaries here is Houston. In Houston is a local park where there's a promenade flanked by decades old live oaks. Some have Spanish moss draped from the limbs. I love spending time there in nature, surrounded by the strength, stillness, and solace. I find peace there, but I often wonder, what have these trees seen? Oh, okay, it's more of a comment. But no, I think that Summer's just resonating with us, this idea of being out in nature and finding the solace, but then the trees remember and they tell you what they remember, right?
Oh, yeah.
With your film, they tell you I know it went down. Do you want to hear?
I know.
And you're I just want to enjoy, you know. But yeah. All right, if we don't have any more questions, we can start pivoting towards, you know, just trying to understand your work and what you're working on now. What are you working on now? Because you're always working on something. You're so prolific, you're just hitting strides. Tell us what you're up to now.
Well, I'm working on a couple documentary projects right now. One is a film called The Inquisitor, which is about Barbara Jordan, who was the first Southern Black woman in Congress in Texas. And, you know, she's one of the many, many political figures, Black women who have done incredible things that people don't know enough about. If you're from Texas, many things are named after Barbara Jordan, so you'll know who she is. But it's kind of so that's one thing, and just kind of really interested in getting her story out there and her ability to get Democrats and Republicans to talk to one another, and you know, asking these larger questions of will we be able to return to that? And what does it mean to be Black and be patriotic, you know? So that's The Inquisitor, and that's a feature-length doc that's in production. And then I'm also working on a documentary right now called Steam, but working title about kind of women's holistic health practices and how,
Steam,
you know,
Yanni Steam.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And asking these larger questions around, you know, how can gynecology work for women, especially, you know, the legacy of gynecology being so problematic, and that, you know, slaves were experimented on to, you know, to come up with these practices, and it's still so imperfect and
terrific. Yeah.
So those are the two docs that I'm sort of managing right now at the same time in production, and then, you know, have fiction features that I want to make, and we'll figure out if
just peppered in there. We got
peppered in there. Maybe they'll happen.
Peppered in there.
Maybe they won't. I don't know. Fiction is so weird. Fiction is so it's not a thing until it's a thing, you know? Yeah. So really, it really is not even worth talking about half the time. You're yeah, I mean, sure, there's scripts out there. Maybe someone will make them. But now we're on strike, so no one's making anything. So I'm just fully on my documentary projects.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. And we look forward to you know, finding out or seeing Steam and seeing Inquisitor, especially Inquisitor. I never heard about Barbara Jordan. So thank you for sharing that. Is it Barbara Jordan, right?
Barbara Jordan, yeah. Anyone should just look up Barbara Jordan, Watergate speech, and your mind will be blown. That's all you have to do. And you'll understand why somebody needs to make a movie about this person.
And I'm glad that somebody's you.
Yeah.
Glad that somebody's you. So for folks that haven't seen the full, your full, I would say, trilogy, right?
Mhm.
The
Yeah,
anthological film.
Mhm.
Where can we check this out? Like in its entirety, the entire film that you
Oh,
showed?
yeah, you can check it out on the REI website. I mean, if you just Google REI, the trees remember my name.
We'll
It'll
drop
come
it
up.
in the chat.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat. It's also on YouTube as well. So yeah, and definitely check it out. Those were a lot of fun to make.
Nice. And lastly, how do folks stay in touch with you and follow your work and like all the things that you're doing in life?
Well, you can, my website is tuckergirl.com.
Like a
You can
girl.
go, yeah, Tucker Girl. And you can also check me out it's Tucker Girl everywhere. So it's Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. But if you go to Tucker Girl and join the mailing list, you'll get my newsletters. So that's a good place to.
So Tucker Girl, all one word, Tucker as in your last name, girl with the U.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much for just this kicking this off with a beautiful, raw, amazing conversation about nature and race and access to nature and sanctuaries. Thank you for sharing your sanctuary. We happen to have the same sanctuary, so that's really great that we're in conversation about that. So thank you so much, Angela, for your time, your thoughts, and sharing that with us.